Hey everyone, and welcome back to Amaranth Bay. Our city's starting to come together. It has some interesting things making up its skyline, like the chimney on the centralized heating plant, of course the aerial lift bridge, but it's really lacking substance. And so today we're going to start working on the downtown. In particular, we're going to try to make a very Midwestern looking skyline. But before we can actually put down any buildings, of course, we need to make a simple road network. And as you may have guessed, we're going to be doing a extremely regular grid. So I went into Google Maps and measured out approximately how large the blocks in Duluth, Minnesota are. And they seem to be about this size. As you can see, I'm laying these out. Although I did end up going a couple of units longer in the longer direction, just because the spacing worked out a little bit better with the main avenues. So with that done, I'm going to go ahead and divide all of these blocks into two with alleys. In Duluth, not every single block in the downtown has an alley like this, but I wanted to just start with this kind of as the base of the road network. And we can always go in and just adjust or remove the alleys as needed as we get to actually putting the buildings down. Obviously, this looks absolutely horrendous so far, so I have to go through and select every single node and make it sloped with node controller. And as I'm going through this, I'm also going to make these intersections, at least where the alleys cross the main avenues, a little bit more attractive by using IMT to try to replicate the base texture for the tram roads, and also add a couple of lines on either side as well, just to make it look like it crosses through here and is actually just one single stretch of road, and it kind of downplays the interaction that the alley has with the road. And I think that just ends up looking a little bit nicer. I'm going to hold off on sloping the nodes that are part of this brick tram road. This is going to be our main avenue, our first avenue, just because I don't want to have the trams running at an angle. That just doesn't really seem like it would be good for vehicle safety. I could be totally wrong about that, but anyway, I'm going to go through and slope every other node, and also copy and paste these IMT designs as we go and encounter other places where they're needed. So with that all done, I think it looks a lot nicer, and it's ready to place down some buildings and then get to some detailing as well. So just eyeballing Duluth skyline, I kind of broke it into three sections. You have the hospital area, the kind of apartments and hotel area, and then you have the downtown core. This is just my name for these kind of arbitrary areas, but we're going to focus on the downtown core in this episode. And this is going to be some of the older buildings, what you might think of when you think of places like Chicago or the Twin Cities or Cleveland or something like that. I wanted to go for that kind of Midwestern architecture, using a wide variety of buildings from places everywhere from Cleveland to Kansas City to the Twin Cities. So I just tagged every single building that I thought I might be able to fit into this area, and I'm really just going to do it by eye and feel, and not worry too much about the placement of each individual building, because that's something we're going to worry about more when we get to the detailing phase. But I'm just taking various camera angles and placing them around to try to get a slight bit of taper to them, centered around this wonderful tall white building here, which is, I forget the name, but it's in Minneapolis. It used to be an office building, and I believe has since been converted into a hotel. But I just absolutely love this building and this asset, which I will link down in the description, along with the entire asset collection for this series, just in case you see anything in the following montage which you would like to download. more thing we have to do before we get to filling the downtown in with some filler buildings and then some detailing as well is taking care of some of the color palettes on these buildings. There's something about the lighting in my graphics settings and all these mods that I have that really brings out color disparities in the different assets. So I just have to go through and use the built-in color adjustments when possible, and when assets don't support that, I just have to turn them into POs and adjust them with some color rectangles as necessary. But overall, that just really involves darkening most of these buildings and trying to get them kind of more even and in line with the graphic settings that I have. And doing that all now is just going to make it a lot easier to kind of get a sense of how this place is going to look and how we're going to fit all these details and things into this new skyline that we have that I think looks not too bad. It's a pretty good start, but we still have a lot to do to finish it off. We're going to do a few passes to fill in the downtown, starting with going through and putting down some ploppable buildings, mostly services so that we can have our services covering the downtown, but also some unique entertainment buildings as well. Most of these buildings look quite a bit more unique than some of the other filler buildings that we're going to use. So I wanted to go through and make sure that we're only using these buildings once throughout the downtown. Maybe we'll use them elsewhere in the city as well. But for the downtown, I wanted them to stand out and be more noticeable than the rest of the buildings. Now I'm starting to pay a bit more attention to the placement along the road and how it interacts with the road, because obviously we're building downtown on a massive slope, and that's going to present some problems, especially when we place buildings along the streets that go up the slope. So we're going to have to do quite a bit of detailing when we get to our detailing pass, which we're actually going to start right now. I wanted to not do all the details at once, but kind of just get a sense of how I'm going to do these and try to build up some patterns that I can more easily use as we move forward in the build. A lot of that is going to involve making these little flat platforms that go out to the entrances on buildings that are up against the slope, and adding some kind of fencing along that fits the theme of the building. I also need to cover up these ugly concrete bases to some of the buildings. Use various techniques for that, sometimes network walls, sometimes props, and sometimes just a PO copy of the building, and lowering that down a little bit so that we get the same texture covering that up. Even though I am trying to have a fairly dense downtown, avoiding, for the most part, surface parking lots, it really wouldn't be a classic American downtown without a couple of giant parking garages. So we have this slightly smaller one here. I'm just going to do some very basic details, making a little planter area to kind of hide it from the road along here using IMT. And then I'm going to use this giant one over on the other side of downtown, kind of connected to these taller skyscrapers at the center of the skyline. I really like how this one almost has the cladding of like a generic 1970s skyscraper or something, so it almost looks like it fits in here as a building, but then you get the contrast around it with all these nice old brick buildings. I just think it has an interesting look and contrast to the rest of the downtown. It was a bit of a struggle to get this to fit into this area just because it's so big. So the details are going to be a little sparser, just covering up some of the awkward angles that we get here based on the slope of the road. We're not going to have any large planter areas or anything like that. The whole parking garage actually kind of ended up disrupting this entire block, and in general, I'm trying to go for 4 deep buildings that butt up against the alleys between the blocks. And I'm trying to be pretty consistent with that, but I had to break that trend here because of how big the garage is. So I'm using these 2 deep buildings here, trying to choose slightly more modern looking ones for the most part, imagining that they would have probably demolished this entire block, or at least this entire side of the block, to make room for the parking garage, and these newer buildings would have come up along with the same development as the garage itself. Behind the garage, we have this really awkward, steep space, so I decided to add this little access road that kind of switchbacks here around this weirdly shaped building, where I'm adding this little extension with PO, and then just adding a few more details to try to hide some of the ugliness of the slope. So the giant parking garage block was probably the most irregular out of the blocks that we're going to build this episode. But there are a few more where there are some other large buildings that kind of interrupt the usual flow of how we're going to place down these buildings. So I'm just going to go through and do a few of those very quickly before we kind of get to the bulk of the downtown area. So this block here has a little extra space compared to the usual ones because it's pretty close to the freeway, so it kind of breaks up the normal flow of the blocks. And it also has a few large buildings in it. So I decided just to make it a little easier on myself and have a large, well, fairly large parking area around back. I'm just going to add a few details to the exteriors of the buildings as well to hide the ugliness of the slope. In Duluth, it looks like a lot of the buildings deal with the slope by just having basically bare walls along the steeper areas. But obviously I can't do that with some of these assets because they have doors built in or windows built in or whatever. So I'm trying to mostly just cover those up with planters and stuff. So it does diverge a little bit from the aesthetic of downtown Duluth. But I think it adds a nice little bit of character to the downtown of Amaranth Bay and makes it stand on its own a little bit more. Then we have this other block that's also pretty close to the freeway. If you'll remember this little area down in the bottom right, this little bare lot, that used to be some kind of beautiful Art Deco building that was demolished to make room for the slip lane for our beautiful interchange. And I'm thinking this whole area was very much disrupted for the development of the freeway. So I wanted to have this empty lot here become a surface parking lot next to this beautiful old building as well. You can imagine maybe there was yet another beautiful Art Deco skyscraper here that was torn down. Then on the other side of the block, we just have kind of our normal row of 4 deep buildings, very eclectic storefronts. Some of them have apartments on top, some of them don't. But overall, I'm just trying to represent that there are both old and new buildings mixed in here due to all the redevelopment that's gone on in this area of downtown. Probably the most representative of this is this really weirdly shaped block. So we have kind of this old warehouse building that I'm imagining has been transitioned into being used for lofts now. And then to the right of it, there's a much more modern mid-rise condo building. For the details for the lofts, I tried to keep it very simple, as if they're trying to preserve the original look of the building as much as possible. For the rest of the block, I wanted to go a little bit more in depth with the details and make it look more modern and up to date. So around back of the condo, we have a small access road that runs into the back here. It's a little parking garage. And then we also have a modern storefront, which I imagine would have been part of the same development, or at least developed around the same time as the condo itself, just working this into the slope as usual. Around back, attached to the access road, I thought it would be interesting to have a little sloped parking lot explicitly for the store. So I'm going to use a couple of curbless roads to make a nice, seamless, paved area and attach the parking lot to the road, and then just add a couple of details to clean it up a little bit more. Now that we've gotten the interesting irregular blocks out of the way, it's time to bang out some of the more normal ones. So we spent a lot of time focusing on the buildings themselves and the details immediately surrounding them, but now I wanted to hone in on the roads and the kind of details you'd see along the roadsides, because these are the things you're going to see, like if I ever do a first-person drive video or just seeing them in the cinematics. These are the things that are going to stand out and are going to define the look of downtown. So I'm just making some IMT templates with planters with these nice little planter trees in them. Flower pots as well. I thought it looked a little dense to just have these trees over and over again, so I'm alternating them with these nice little pots of flowers. And then I'm just able to copy and paste those along the roads, which makes it nice and easy to detail up the entire downtown relatively quickly. Along First Avenue, I wanted to add a few extra details because this is going to be the busiest street by far, the most important one in terms of visuals. So along with the planters and trees, I'm also going to add these frankly adorable little parking meter props, because there's no such thing as free parking in Amaranth Bay. And then I'm just going to copy and paste that all the way along First Avenue, and I just need to make a couple adjustments here and there where the trees are clipping into these theater signs, and also here along this giant fire station. I'm going to remove all the details and add a red line of paint along the curb for obvious reasons. And I'm also going to add these hanging emergency lights. So whenever the fire trucks are coming out of here, these are, at least in theory, going to be flashing to warn people to watch out for that. Then we have a few other unique details that I wanted to add to the major intersections, like these really cool old-fashioned clock lamps. I think those are just really cool. A couple of flags here and there, just in case you ever forget what country you're in. It's nice to have that little utility there. And finally, around the major intersection of First Avenue and Canal Point Drive, or whatever it's called, I honestly forget the name, I'm going to have a couple of trash cans and post office drop boxes as well. I also have a whole collection of various signs and other things that I'm going to add to some of the storefronts that are looking a little bit more blank, usually because I've turned them into POs and it's removed some of the built-in sign props, but also just some of the more bare-looking buildings. I wanted First Avenue to look really alive, especially at night, so I'm going to focus on putting some of these cool, unique theater signs on some of these buildings as well. To finish off this episode, I wanted to add a couple details that are going to stand out more than some of these smaller ones down at the ground level. So first, I wanted to change this office building into a hotel like I was talking about before with the Rand Tower in Minneapolis. I wanted to do something similar with this building, and I'm going to clip a few residential blocks into that to simulate all the people that are staying in the hotel and to have them basically be permanent residents in Amaranth Bay. Then I wanted to add a couple things to some of these taller buildings. I kind of hate to give Wells Fargo the time of day, but it's kind of iconic. Pretty much every American downtown has a Wells Fargo building, so yeah, we have that thing up there. Then this absolutely glorious Olympia beer sign right along the freeway. I just think that really adds a nice little bit of definition to the city. Of course, there's still a whole lot to do in the downtown, but I wanted to have a nice continuous area of development, and that's going to give us something to build off of in the future. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Amaranth Bay. Can't wait to see you on the next one. Bye!